Welcome back to another Explain Yourself. We haven't done one of these in forever. I really like doing them though, so I've been pestering all of the people in my brand new department to come and do an interview with me. So this is Elsa. She's actually not in my new department anymore, but she used to be, and she's now a postdoc at the CARE Institute. So thank you for being my first victim at my new university.
Actually, the Carey Institute.
Carey Institute, whoops.
All good. I don't think anybody over there is going to mind or know. So there we go.
Yeah, so you're a postdoc, which is cool. So can you give us sort of like the elevator pitch for your current research?
Sure. So just fair warning, I've been at this job for about a week. So it's going to sound a little bit fresh, but it's fresh to me. So I am part of a team of postdocs that were brought in to the Carey Institute to help in the wrap-up of data from the Baltimore ecosystem study, which is the long-term ecological research, LTER, program that was funded by NSF in the 1990s. And they've been collecting data in Baltimore, trying to understand how cities function as ecosystems. And obviously, when you have a lot of people over a long period of time in a space that was really ecologically dynamic, there are some really interesting changes that happen. And so this team of 4 postdocs was recently brought on to look at this data from 20 years and really try to see what we can learn about kind of the nature of cities as this project wraps up.
Wow. So does this include, I've heard a little bit about or like seen some of the papers over the years that have mentioned Baltimore. This includes the stuff about like trees and crime and like other things about like how ecology and the system of the city fit together? Yeah,
so Baltimore is one of the first 2 urban sites to get this LTER funding, which you can do a lot with when you have a lot of money for a long period of time. So some of the really interesting things that have come out of the Baltimore project are, like you were talking about, this relationship with trees and how that not only shapes people's behavior today, but the trees that are on the ground are reflective of people's behaviors and choices in the past. So Baltimore is what they refer to as kind of the most northern southern city. So it has a long history of really intense human choices and institutions like slavery, segregation, and the way that people were forced to be in the landscape has got pervasive effects on where we find trees, of what kind of quality, where we find people whose perceptions of trees are positive or negative. And so the trees in Baltimore tell a really interesting story about the people and how people have interacted with that land for a long time. That's one major project they've worked on. Another major focus of the Baltimore project is the idea of the watershed. So the idea of a watershed is that rain that falls on this given area of land is all going to end up in the same place, and it takes with it particulates, it takes with it fertilizer and nutrients and pollution. But it's really a novel approach in the grand scheme of knowledge to apply that to a city. And so understanding how the streams of Baltimore that then connect to the Chesapeake Bay watershed at a larger scale, how they're carrying nutrients from human activities and how that relates to stream health and how we can kind of target stream restoration to improve water quality and therefore quality of life of people in Baltimore. So a lot of really interesting pieces have come out of this project over the last 2 decades.
Wow. And so that's been, as you said, a long-term project. So you are one of 4 postdocs that were picked to sort of like, are you doing like a synthesis of everything? Is that?
Yeah, that's the point. So they obviously have collected data in line with NSF's guidelines for the core areas of data collection. But really what you can do with such a rich data set is start to talk across those lines and pull pieces from the human perceptions and the nutrient cycling and the biodiversity pieces and try to understand how those are interrelated. And that's what I'm really hoping to do and that they'd like me to do. So we'll see how it goes.
I'm very excited by the sound of such interdisciplinary analysis. I think that's super valuable. I always tell people you can't separate humans from like the rest of ecology.
Precisely, And I think that Baltimore has really done a huge service to the field of ecology by putting urban ecology on the map in that respect. And really pushing for that deliberate incorporation instead of just in the absence of humans, this is what happens. That's just not our world.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Nice. So how did you sort of wind up there? How did you get to that postdoc position?
Yeah, so great question. So obviously I just finished, it's been about a year now, finished my PhD here at UIC. Mm-hmm. I came in really interested in urban systems. It's always been kind of an interest to me professionally. I spent some time after college actually working with a group here in Chicago called the Student Conservation Association. And particularly we were hiring high school youth and providing them with job skills training and environmental education, and then having them and facilitating them getting out to the forest preserves to do environmental restoration work. And just the differences in their experience of nature versus the experience of nature that I had versus everybody else's experience of nature all coming together in one place in the city was really fascinating to me. And I also kind of at that point was starting to make the leap into, well, those perceptions are going to change the nature that we see here. Whether it's what species people are choosing to plant in their gardens or what species we're choosing to conserve or prioritize, really got me interested in this connection between people and their environment. So I did a master's degree before coming to do my PhD, and both of those projects worked on kind of urban biodiversity and urban habitat provisioning. But kind of my first foray into synthesis work was through a fellowship at the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center, which is SSYNC. Yep. And there I actually was able to work with a team of other grad students. We didn't have a mentor or anybody.
Oh, nice.
Nobody, they just let us loose. It was like one of those moments like, oh my God.
You're like looking around for the person in charge.
Yeah, and then they like all looked at me. Yes. Okay. So in that project, we started off really thinking about this idea of like vacant land transformation into gardens and how does that get initiated, and wanted to kind of understand that on a citywide scale. Well, that project didn't quite pan out the way we thought it would, but what we ultimately were able to evaluate is kind of this idea of connections across a landscape, both ecological connections that allow an individual organism, say a pollinator or a bird that might eat pests, or like things that provide a service in the city to get from one place to another, habitat patches. But there's also this idea of social connectivity, right? Like if we're sitting down together, we can share ideas, we can form a connection that can't happen if you don't bring people into the same spaces. And so we looked at community gardens as a space that not only provide habitat patches in cities, but also provide a deliberate space for people to connect around an ecological issue. And so we did some pretty computationally intensive work building maps of these networks in a couple of different cities and comparing the patterns of connectivity from a socio-ecological perspective. And that was kind of my first taste of like big data power in synthesis research. And that's kind of the selling point that landed me at the Carey Institute. So
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of big data sets is super important in what we do because it's so time and labor and people intensive to collect ecology data sets in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, some patterns have this temporal lag that you can't capture from just, 1 or 2 or even 5 field seasons. You need long-term information in order to make, strong policy decisions in order to make predictions that are accurate about the future. So nice. Data's a really important thing and also a challenge.
Yeah. So in between your PhD here and the postdoc you just started, you did some work in Germany?
I did. I actually just got back a couple weeks ago. I spent 10 months in Berlin looking at legacy effects of the Berlin Wall on forests, persistent forests on the outskirts of Berlin.
Nice.
So
it's very timely,
yes,
considering the anniversary.
Yes, the anniversary was just this past weekend, and I was unfortunately home by that point already. But I've been watching all the news coverage, and really, it's really incredible. But But yeah, so this wall, we all know, divided people, but it also divided forests. And the city of Berlin is also a municipal state of Berlin now, and it's fully enclosed by the municipal state of Brandenburg. Yeah. And so we evaluated forests that were bisected by the wall and those that were not bisected by the wall to evaluate whether there were differences in the plant community structure, both based on location around Berlin and specifically related to the presence of the wall.
Interesting.
And so I'm still picking through some of the data, but it seems like there are some interesting kind of legacy pieces that we can still see in the forest community even 30 years after the wall's been down.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. That also has some interesting modern connotations relevant here in our own country. It's
Absolutely.
very interesting.
You know, when you make decisions like this, the ramifications are they're gonna be persistent, and we recognize that there are social problems. I think,
absolutely.
I expect that you also are very aware of the social divisions.
And the walls are often put up more or less because of social problems, right? So
Precisely.
all of the way people conceptualize the walls and their existence is driven by social thoughts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But and I think Berlin is a really interesting case study in this, because the forests in Europe largely have been managed for many hundreds of years. And so it's not pristine wilderness that we're talking about dividing. In the United States and on the border here, it is.
Yeah.
So, what we're finding in these very kind of equilibrium state forests that are managed to a certain state is that we're still seeing an effect. So I can only speculate, but my speculation is that in a pristine environment, it's going to be an even bigger effect.
Yeah, that's a thing we're all watching. So, but it's interesting.
Too.
Like, hopefully, the things that you publish out of that work will maybe be useful in informing decisions in the future.
I like to maintain that rosy rose glasses.
And that position was through a Fulbright, correct?
It was. Yep.
So I don't think we've had a Fulbright scholar on our interview series yet. So tell us about the process of applying for and receiving a Fulbright.
Sure. So like with any big award, I applied for the Fulbright with my eyes wide open, thinking there's no way this is going to happen, but you have to put your best foot forward and try in life, because nothing ever comes if you just sit around and let life happen to you.
And as so many advisors have told me, write it, because it's good practice to write applications even if you don't get the award.
That's their way of saying, please keep going.
Yeah.
Please. So I started toying with the idea of applying for a Fulbright about 18 months before I actually started writing anything. And I went to some informational sessions. Fulbright is very well understood and facilitated through university administration. We actually here at UIC have like a major grants coordinator who helps students with those kinds of applications. And so I went to some information, and they told me, the most important thing when writing a Fulbright is to tell them why you need to go to this place, why you can't do this work anywhere else. And I'll be completely honest, part of my major motivation was to go work with this lab, who, as I was doing my PhD, the work of Ingo Kvarik and Leonie Fischer was really influential to me, and they were together in a lab at the Technical University of Berlin. And so I was like, how am I going to sell this? Like, I want to go work with these guys. I need a project. Yeah. And so I just started thinking on that advice and really reflecting on it and kind of turning it over in my head for months and months. And finally came across this, idea in my mental filings about walls. And this was around about the time when the 2016 election was happening, and I was appalled by the discourse, and then the election happened, and I was, I'm sure most people understand. Had their own feelings about that night, and they're similar. So then I started really kind of drafting this project in earnest. And originally I was just going to look at one small forest, a fairly large forest, but one small segment of the wall. And then as I got to Germany, once the project was accepted and I was suddenly moving across the world with my family, I got there and I'm kind of butting my head against this problem of like, this is just a case study. This isn't replicable. This isn't very scientific. And I got some advice from somebody there that said, when you're up against a problem like that, you need to take a step back and you need to blow the problem up. And so I started thinking much bigger about like the whole wall complex and the idea of borders and in general, and how do kind of these social borders influence what should be contiguous habitat, and kind of put the pieces back together with that kind of frame of reference. And so the project is still in kind of an analysis phase, but it should be moving forward here soon.
Nice. Yeah. So when you conceive of a project for a major thing like that, or for any sort of postdoc, I know a lot of postdocs are hired for specific projects that the supervisor already has in mind, but other times it's like this where you sort of develop your own. How much did you do where you were developing this project with the collaborators you were going to be working with in Germany?
So the first time I shared my idea with them, they thought it was really stupid. Which is part of life.
That was not the answer I was expecting.
And I said, maybe I'm not making myself clear, because I think this is pretty interesting. And so that decision to assert myself and say, like, I know this is an interesting project, let me show you, was a really big thing. And take that into consideration.
Yeah.
Like, don't let other people get you down, especially people you've never met before. So,
who you highly respect in your field.
And yeah. Don't take criticism personally. So once I finally made my point, and they understood that it did have some scientific merit, and I came at it and said, even if we don't find an effect here, this is a useful cataloging of the biodiversity in these forests. Have a backup plan, even if you're just kind of backing up into it. So then we did quite a bit of working together once I got to Germany to really solidify the project. But the Fulbright Commission is not strictly science-based, and so I needed something that was going to be kind of appealing to a totally professionals in totally different fields audience. And they also administer grants for artists and for journalists and for humanities. But the whole point of Fulbright is to promote international cooperation and transatlantic or transoceanic, or US and Canada, I guess, have exchanges too. International relationships. They're a State Department program, and so thinking about science as it related to that was a useful exercise for me. And then I got all sorts of eyes on it from the university level, from the department level here. I had a lot of help in getting that pulled together and submitted, and ultimately in the success of it. So.
Very nice. Yeah. And you also mentioned, and we've talked to a few people on here before who have families at various stages of development, but not only did you start a family in your PhD, but then you also shipped everyone across the ocean for this postdoc. So what was all of that like?
I have a very supportive husband, more than just like passive support. He is 100% on my side. When I was considering applying for the Fulbright, he's like, there's no question here. Like, you have to do this, and we will make it work however it works. While we were in Germany, was home with our son all day during the day, and then he would work online at night. So, his capacity to put my dreams first has been really humbling, and a lot of feelings that go with that, but ultimately I couldn't have done what I have done so far without his support.
Hey, Elsa's husband, you're awesome.
So that has been great. My son is 2. He's super freaking flexible. He goes where I go, and he loved Germany, and he keeps saying, like, can we go back to Berlin? Want to go back to Berlin? So, that's kind of sad, but we're off to New York in a couple weeks. I think he'll find some new adventures to have out there, and It's been good. Actually, he was traveling with me for work. The two of them were like 2 weeks after he was born. So it's just his life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of formative childhood experiences, this is the part where we sort of
Take it way back.
Yeah.
Okay.
So why are you a scientist? And not only why are you a scientist, why are you an ecologist? You talked a little bit about your interest in urban ecology already,
Yeah.
but also why are you a scientist who became an ecologist who decided to go to grad school? Why not just stop after a bachelor's degree? So where did you come from and how did you get here?
So I actually started college as an architecture major. I was not what you might call clear on my life as a kid. So my mom was always super encouraging of whatever dreams we had and really kind of let us drive the boat on all sorts of things, but I've always been interested in the world outside. There was, I'm sure you hear a similar story from lots of people you talk to who love nature. Like there was one little vacant property on our block, and my friends and I were out there every day, climbing trees, mucking in the mud. And as a 5-year-old, I thought it was enormous. It probably wasn't, it was probably like 10 feet wide and 20 feet deep.
Yeah.
Looking back at the maps of it now, I'm like, God, that was small. But it was so exciting to go out there and play and to turn rocks over and find worms and to not feel like we were being watched every minute. And I feel like, I am probably one of the youngest people in the world who remembers that feeling. I feel like now we're so on top of our kids, scheduling their time. And my mom really had the foresight to not do that as much as possible in the early 90s to really let me explore.
Or even force us sometimes. Get outside, I don't want to see you again.
Right? It's 40 degrees and not quite raining. Get out there. So I feel like I sound like an old codger when I say that, but it's true. That was really formative for me. Yeah. And then I don't know. I really I couldn't put together the love that I had for nature with the science, curricular science, for a long time. I didn't take a science class my senior year of high school. I just didn't want to. And so I didn't, because I thought science was kind of boring in school. I was like, they know what we're going to find out. This is stupid. And finally it clicked to me at some point in college. I think I was a junior in college when I realized that you don't know the answer if it's research. That is the point of research. And that got me excited again about the idea of becoming a scientist. And so I had originally planned on going to vet school and working with animals and with wildlife and in conservation some way. I knew I wanted to work in conservation. But then that just didn't quite feel right. I didn't really want to work with sick animals. I didn't really want to I didn't really want the glamorized field side of things either. That's hard. It's hard work. Yeah. And so, I thought about it in my senior year of college. I was like, maybe I'll just apply for grad school. And I applied to grad programs right after my undergrad, and I didn't get in. I didn't get in anywhere.
I especially I also have sort of a squiggly route to grad school.
I feel like that's kind of the way it goes, though.
Yeah, but I think that it's really valuable to hear that your first round of applications were not successful. It's okay if that happens, just with the whole thing about applying to grants and fellowships. It's okay if it doesn't always work out, because it means you just have to rethink your plan.
Right.
Yeah.
And I, even now when I submit papers and I get a lot of criticism and critique, I read it, and at first I'm like, oh, you just don't understand. And then I let it sit for a day or two, and I was like, wait, if you don't understand, I need to reevaluate this. And this is all helping to put this to the good. And so I think that being able to take rejection and to take criticism is top of my list of soft skills that are important in science.
Which led to you so gracefully reiterating yourself with your German collaborators. Right?
Yes, yeah.
Nice.
If you give up when the first bump comes on the road, you're not gonna make it very far.
Nice. So it's both a creative process, but also like a team process. None of us does this alone.
Absolutely. And your team just gets bigger and better and more refined as you go. So
very cool.
That's good.
Nice.
Yeah.
So the other thing that we like to talk about in Explain Yourself, because this is a video medium, and also because, like I said, I took a non-traditional route to grad school, I'm really interested in the idea of representation and talking about how anyone who looks or is however they are can still be a scientist.
Yeah.
So whatever diversity sort of like checked boxes you might consider yourself to belong in, and that includes the fact that we're women in science, or that you have a family, or that you took a non-traditional route, or anything else in your background that sort of you feel makes you a diverse scientist. Could you talk a little bit about how those things might have shaped your experience with your whole science career so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in a really good position, whereas I don't like being a woman in science is challenging, and being a mom in science is also challenging and kind of similar in overlapping ways. But I think that the biggest change that I have like noticed in myself is just an ability to not take any crap from anybody. Like nobody owns your time, and nobody is truly the gatekeeper to your success. And so you don't need to give any time to people who are going to try to put you down. And so like I think that the institution is really changing, and I've noticed it just in my last 5-6 years as a grad student, and especially as I've had kids there. Like, people generally are in tune to these kinds of issues now in a way that maybe they weren't before, or maybe they were kind of undercurrent discussion points. But now we're really kind of coming out and saying, like, this is who I am, and my science is built on who I am in a lot of ways, and so you can't attack who I am and expect my science to stand up, right? You need to accept that diverse ideas and diverse approaches and diverse voices in the conversation are the only way to generate enough creativity to solve problems these days. And I take a very applied approach to science and kind of my own philosophy of it. But I think that we need to not only continue to foster more girls in STEM, but we also need to be unabashedly women in STEM. And like, I'm not going to listen to you tell me to sit down and shut up. Like, that's just not going to happen.
Marvelous.
And I also am very forthright about the fact that I have a kid and a family, and that my time after work is my time to choose not to answer your email, or to, do what I want to do. And so, like, that we talk a lot about work-life balance nowadays, and that's not my very favorite term, because I feel like if you think about like a teeter-totter, you can always add more on the sides and still be balanced, right? I heard somebody mention you need to have centering of all of those things, because if you put what's really important to you near the center of that fulcrum, then you're not going to be all over the place, but it's really more true to who you are as a person. And so I've really been like centering in on my own identity and my own research, and kind of letting that help me take steps forward.
I think your analogy is really valuable, because I sometimes find myself doing that. Yes, if you want to make a balance, if more work things happen, you feel like you have to add more life things, and then you just wind up panicking.
More time? You don't, because it doesn't exist. So
no, that's a great analogy. Yeah. And I love your unashamedly this is who I am sort of thing. We have the same advisor, or her PhD advisor is now my PhD advisor. So do you think that having a female advisor who also has children of her own made it, easier, or that there was a more understanding atmosphere going on when you decided you were going to start a family? I know you don't have anything to compare it against necessarily, but how was that process of breaking the news to your advisor, as people unfortunately have to put it?
That was not my experience at all.
No?
So actually, even before I was even considering having babies, Emily was like, yeah, grad school can be a great time to have a kid.
Yeah.
And I was like, at first I was like, no. But then I realized that, your life is gonna keep going. And if you count grad school as this purgatory you have to get through, or if you count it as, just doing your time, then you're chalking yourself up to 4, 5, 6, 7 years of not feeling like you're living your life.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really unhealthy approach that people have to grad school. And I think you need to remember that you are a person, and you are a person first, and you're a grad student, and that's part of your personhood, but it's not your definition.
Right.
And so it's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
It is absolutely challenging, but you don't owe anybody ever 70 or 80 hours a week. You don't owe anybody thinking about your project every minute of every day. Mm-hmm. And so you have to, and this comes back to just asserting yourself and saying, I'm going to do my work, and I'm going to do it the best I can do, and I'm going to give it this amount of time. And, sometimes you have a deadline and you need to extend it a little bit, and you need to be flexible, but you also have to be in the driver's seat. And so I think that, having an advisor who had children and who recognized that was a valuable approach was really important to me. I mean, I imagine I would have had some real problems working with somebody who expected more from anybody that anybody's really able to give. But I also think that those are the kinds of people that we need to call out, and we need to report that to, here at UIC we're unionized, which is super awesome. Not everybody has that benefit. But I think that we all need to have each other's backs, and instead of getting into this idea of I have to be the best, and so I have to step on all your heads to get there, that's really damaging. And I think that that's part of what that idea of an impossibly long work week perpetuates. And so just remembering that people, grad students especially, are human, and doing human things getting married and having kids is a thing that some humans choose to do, and that is a reasonable thing, and you don't owe anybody an explanation, and hopefully you find more supporters than haters.
Yeah. And I definitely agree that I think the atmosphere is changing, although it's not necessarily going to be a flip of the switch kind of dealio. So I guess with your mindset of being very assertive in that this is how you are going to do things, does that come in at the phase where you are shopping for collaborators/supervisors? Is it a conversation you have once you've decided to work with this person? Do you have tips for people who are starting out on this journey and want to know how best to approach asserting themselves?
Yeah, that's so I would encourage you, if that's something that you're in that phase, or even feeling like you're not in a good place with your current situation and need to make some changes, first look in and do the reflection on what it is that you want, and instead of kind of acting reactively to what's happening to you, think about what would be a good balance for you. And then if there are conversations that need to happen, then find a way to have those conversations, and they can be really tough. But find, if you need to go in and talk to an advisor who's not very understanding, figure out what you're going to say, practice what you're going to say, and then find a friend who will go out with you for a drink, or to go bowling, or to go for a run, or whatever will help you, de-stress. But you can't let everybody pile onto you. You have to be able to at least say, this is what I need, even if you're talking quietly or whatever. So
all of that was super important. I also think I loved your advice about having a support group, like a friend or someone to go out with you after it's over. I also, though, have heard from a lot of people and even recognized it myself, although I haven't had any issues, but being a grad student, like your supervisor or your advisor or whoever you want to call them is like the person that you meet with most directly, but like the department is a village and you can go to any and all of the other faculty and probably should, in fact.
Absolutely.
And so, if there was an issue, I imagine that.
Yeah, for sure.
People.
And, I think that from stories I've heard, like I've never had a terrible experience, thankfully, but from stories I've heard, like, if you're having a problem, you're probably not the only one who's having that problem. And so speaking up to somebody that you trust can really help get the ball moving on progress.
Yeah.
And so, like, even if it's hard to talk about, like, some things need to be talked about.
Yeah.
So.
And most importantly, as Elsa keeps saying, you are valuable and your time is valuable and you don't owe anyone anything. And so if a consensus or an agreement can't be reached, part of asserting yourself is choosing to find some place that would be healthier and happier for you. Right?
Absolutely. And you don't have to get to a breaking point before that happens either. Like, I feel like so much of the discourse is that, my PhD ruined me, and like, that's not how it's supposed to be. So don't let it be that way.
Yeah.
And don't let other people ruin you. Like, give yourself some love. So.
And in much the same way that you've been discussing how your job doesn't, or like your time and doesn't have to be devoted to your job doesn't have to define you. So even though a lot of people might know you as a scientist, is there something interesting or surprising that you would want people to know that makes you a more three-dimensional person beyond your science? Something that's interesting or surprising to people to find out about you as a scientist?
Well, I really like to do DIY projects and crafts. Just yesterday, I was just putzing around in I have like a little craft room in my house, and I made a Thanksgiving table runner. So,
of course.
I was like, what is this stuff? Oh, of course, it's just a turkey. So
nice.
It's
cool. Are you
creative, it's fun.
You make all of the things that you give to people for the holidays as gifts kind of person?
In some respects.
Yeah.
I recognize that some things that I make are not desirable to others, and so I try not to give useless things. Like, I try not to foster my craft habit on anybody else. But sometimes I do go into it with, like, I'm going to make something nice for this person and do that. But
awesome. DIY projects.
Yeah.
That ties in with your creativity
yes,
thing, right?
I think I identify strongly as a creative person, so there's
Although
that.
It's arguable that a lot of ecology is really just a DIY craft project.
That is true, and that's my favorite part.
I've cut so many pieces of wire, and I made cubes of window screen.
We went once when I was a master's student. We did a field research trip to South Carolina.
Ooh.
And we went to the hardware store, and we had buckets and kiddie pools and like 20 sleeves of red Solo cups and a few pumps for fish tanks, and like we were doing a project on crab osmoregulation in different salinities and different pHs, and we were joking as we ran through the store, like, do you think that anybody here knows what we're up to?
Right.
Do we just look like real weirdos?
When you go up to the checkout and the person's like, what are they doing with this stuff?
I do not understand why you need 500 Solo cups.
We're having the best party. We're inviting every crab.
Yeah, pretty much. We're going to fill them all with crabs and torture them a little bit.
Yeah, is there anything else that you would like people to know about you or your grad school experience or your research, or just want to say in general?
No, I think that we've kind of hit on the big ones. I think that grad school for me has been a really positive experience, and it's kind of launched me to some really interesting places. And there are opportunities abound. And in grad school I didn't win any major external NSF funding. I didn't present at the biggest conferences. I didn't have tons of top name journals with lots of famous people. But then afterwards, I got a Fulbright, and I've worked with a couple people who were like super inspiring to me. And so the pressure to get down on the metrics can be really strong, but that does not define your science even, and certainly doesn't define you as a person. So
so thank you so much, Elsa, for coming and talking to us and agreeing to be in my first UIC
my pleasure.
Explain Yourself victim. You had a lot of really not just useful but like really impactful things to say, so thank you for that.
So yeah, you're welcome. It has been really fun to chat with you and go through a lot of these things. I feel like they float through my mind and I never really have the like clear path to put them out there.
Well, so now they are forever on the internet.
Perfect.
Forever and ever on the internet.
Excellent.
If you liked this video, don't forget to like it. If you didn't like this video, please share it with someone who would. And if you'd like to support the Roving Naturalist, remember to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. Then go check out my Patreon page. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you really like science and other nerdy things, you should also check out my science-themed Dungeons & Dragons show, Nature Check, on Twitch, YouTube, and wherever you find podcasts. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.